we come to you from various places and spaces in our hearts and in our lives. Our stories intertwined for this brief moment in front of your presence. And we ask that you would speak to us as uniquely as you have wired us and made us as an artist and a potter. Would you now mold us in the way that you see fit? Would you speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. So I'm going to take a turn because this is going to be like, I don't know. It's going to be like I just learned how to drive stick. So I learned to drive stick in like an 88 Volvo station wagon. And my mom literally sat next. She was sitting in the driver's seat first. I'm not making this up. She's sitting in the driver's seat. I'm that seat. Passenger is what it's called. And I'm sitting in the passenger seat and she goes, all right, now watch my feet and watch my hands. And we drove for 5 minutes. She gets out of the car and goes, your turn, puts me in the driver's seat, and I am in the passenger seat. This is how we used to learn to drive before you guys got all those classes. That was it. See my feet, see my hands, don't hit anything. Let's go. And my first few times jamming through those gears went like this, right? And I stalled out in an intersection. I have that. And then I didn't stall out again for a really, really long time. And I made it through. So it worked. Apparently, I can't make fun of her because it worked. I can drive stick. And that means I get to drive fun sports cars now or drive in other countries. Those of you who only learn automatic get to another country and you're like, what do I do? Take the bus. That's all you got. But those first few times, it's a little jerky. And because of my introductions stack on each other, but I really like the one I had planned before last night, we're still going with it, but it's going to feel a little bit like you just got to stop start, but we're doing it anyway because I have the mic, and this will be fun. So in light of what we talked about, we're going forward. Psalm 22. Here's the question, like we often do. I want to start off with a question. You're going to turn to a few people around you. What is your favorite comfort food? This is not what Psalm 22 is about, but it's about to go really, really heavy again. And so as we do that, I want us to take a moment. What is your favorite comfort food? If you say salad, I'm calling you a liar, and you're not getting the mic. Though I'm sure one of you likes kale or quinoa, and that's what you turn to when you really need comfort food. Just don't take the microphone and say it. But no, think ooey gooey. Like if you're watching Food Network and the episode is comfort foods, what are you expecting them to make? Or for you, when you're like, this has been a day or this has been a shift, right? If you're in the service industry, you know what that's like, where everybody goes out afterwards and nobody's ordering kale salads at 12:30 a.m., I promise you. But turn towards a few people around you. What is your comfort food go-to? And then I'll pull us back in just a minute. Ready? Turn to your friend, share those deep secrets of comfort food indulgences, and then I'll pull us back. Go. All right, so go ahead, finish up those recipes that you're swapping. We're not going to pass the mic, but you guys can talk loud enough. What are a few of the go-tos? Throw your hand up. I'll point at you. Yes, Brooks. Chicken nugs. Who else had nugs on the list? All right. Brandon, what do you got? Waffle House. That's that Southern in you. You can't get rid of it. Anybody else? Yeah. Chicken noodle soup. Mac and cheese. That's what that picture is that you can't see behind there. Subtle suggestions. What else? Not Kraft though, right? Like not Kraft mac and cheese or Kraft mac and cheese? In a bind. It's Kraft. Oh, wait, we go with it. All right. Stay out of my comfort food. Don't judge me. What else? One or two more? Cheese enchiladas. Sausage and gravy. That's just breakfast. I love it. That's a good one. Anybody else biscuits and gravy? Is that on the list at least? Yeah, it's so good. I love it. It's a good choice in life. All right. So today's psalm is not about comfort foods. I promise you. But because it is a bit heavier, I did want us to recognize, at least together, that we have moments where the experiences in our lives move us towards something looking for comfort, right? And there's problems in our life that a pint of ice cream or a Pizookie seem like they're going to solve and we'll be all right. But there's also other moments in life where the weightiness of the world and the crashing of the circumstances around us disorient us so bad that we're left asking, I don't even know where to turn, right? We're not just hot Cheetos away from feeling better, but there is a stirring in our soul that wonders if God is even seeing this because things are so messed up, so heavy, so broken, and our experience in that moment is so heavy. That's why we started with comfort food. But I will tell you this, that other experience, the second experience I described, is one that you will face as a human being in this world. This is not one of those messages that says, hey, you might be in this circumstance someday, and so if you are, just tuck this away, and this will help you in that space. I would say, and I would venture a guess, that there are some of us who would say we're in that space right now. Like the circumstances, I got a smile on my face, I showed up, and I mouthed some of these words, but my experience in life right now, I'm wondering, God, where are you even at? I've been suffering for a long time or a short time, but I am wondering where you are in this moment. Others of us might be coming out of one of those seasons, and so I want to say I hope this echoes back something that's been true in you that will carry you over in the next season. And some of us might just get completely blindsided by this, like a pothole in the road in a little while where we're going along saying, I'm doing good. Jesus is always present. Why do people act like they don't feel like God's present? Until you hit that moment, flip over your handlebars of life and say, whoa, how did I end up here? God, I'm reaching for you, but there's nothing to grab, it feels like. When the weight of the world crashes in. And I've heard these words of Psalm 22 spoken in many different ways by many different people. As we enter and walk through this psalm, I want you to know it's one that I'm acquainted with. The questions coming out of isolation or sadness or deep loss or confusion or uncertainty are human questions to ask. And I've been there. I've been there with people as they pass on the hospital bed from what seemed like avoidable situations. Wondering, God, weren't you paying attention? I remember being with one of the MC leaders in a church that we were planting, and he asked the question verbatim, where was God when his young disciple friend that he'd been mentoring and loving and leading, fresh out of a motorcycle gang, was making a left into a convenience store and got cut in half by a car? And so a few weeks into this journey of this young man following Jesus, walking out of death to life, all of a sudden literally cut down. And this man who was at the work of planting a church, leading a missional movement in his neighborhood, asked the question, God, where are you? I don't even see you in this. In tears at the graveside, still unable to process. I've heard these words as parents watch their kids walk into heroin addictions out of life, saying, didn't we do it all the way we were supposed to? God, where are you? I don't even see you in this. How will this ever break? For husbands or wives as their spouse drive out the driveway, never to return, asking the question, God, where are you? This seems too heavy. Psalm 22 opens up with one of these cries. It's a heart-wrenching, gut-felt cry, so personal that it's the one that Jesus picks up when he's on the cross. Let me read David's description of these depths of despair. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. In you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm. I'm not even a man. Scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults at me, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions, they tear at their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I'm poured out like water. All of my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted within me. My mouth is like a dried up piece of pottery. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. David, as he writes this, is using strong pictures to describe what his emotional and physical status is as he's in this moment. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are put on display. People stare and they gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lions. Save me from the horns of wild oxen. This deeply personal and poignant description of David is him trying his best to articulate what life felt like in that moment for him. Maybe there's experiences where you can look back in your life and say, I've felt like I was struggling like David describes. Maybe nobody knows it in this moment, but you're still swirling in that same pool right now. These words echo throughout time, finding their ultimate fulfillment in Jesus on the cross. Yes, these are the words that he speaks. But when David wrote them, he wasn't writing down something that someday later somebody can pick up that he was distant from. This was how he was experiencing life in this moment. And we get a snapshot into his mind. We see his mind feeling, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me? My body is broken. My bones feel like they're on display. I can't sleep. My heart's literally just melted within me. I feel like everywhere I turn, somebody's looking to undo me. And not only that, but they're making fun of me for trusting you instead of just working this out myself. Hurling insults. Feels like people are ravenous animals just trying to find some weak spot in me that they can tear me apart. Tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. I don't see how I'm going to make this through. And then the flip side of his brain where he tries to talk to himself, right? Where he's like, but I know you've done this in the past. You're that same God. We just sang it. You're that same one who rescued Israel time and time again. I look back at past rescue and I realize that you are able to save. You've done it before. The nation celebrates this all the time. But my experience is it's not happening now. In the depths of despair, David clings to just that glimmer of hope, a belief that God's faithfulness and deliverance are still there despite the overwhelming circumstances seemingly saying otherwise. And those first 21 verses are his really long Instagram post. And we don't know where the picture would be taken from. And I love that, right? So we don't know where David is when he writes this. Sometimes in David's Psalms, it's like he's in a cave hiding out from Saul because Saul wants to kill him. And we're like, yeah, that is a lonely place to be. Or there's other Psalms that he wrote after he messed up really bad, right? And he's confessing his sin. And we're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. If you sleep with somebody's wife and then you have them killed, you should probably be writing a Psalm like that. This particular one, we have no idea what's going on in his life. But I love that for us. Because if you resonate with some of those lines, if you resonate with that call at all, then the Psalm's for us. And what are the moments when you felt God was distant? When the eviction is served, when the diagnosis comes back cancer, when the baby dies in utero, when the debt piles up and the hours at work don't match, when the sentence is ruled against you, when the job is lost and there's not a new one on the forefront. When the funeral happens and then you're left with the questions now that all the decision making is done. God, where were you? When the addiction seems to be stronger than all your resources, when the situations we never thought we'd be in are causing the darkness to swallow us up so violently that our vision cannot see God anywhere in the picture. What do we do in these moments? My prayer is that we, like David, learn to cry out. What do you do when you feel that way? Some of us feel like, well, then I must distance myself from God and his people. Then I must go on my own because there surely must be something wrong with me. This isn't how followers of Jesus are meant to be feeling, and so there must be something wrong with me. So let me distance myself from these things. I can't stand to sing these words. And I would say that if you're in that moment, doing what David did, crying out to God, even yelling into the darkness, do it. Cry out to God. Don't distance yourself from him on your own end. Yes, you may not see him, but that does not mean he is not there. If you look at ancient people who have followed God and written about it, the mystics, as it were, church fathers and mothers, they regularly write of dark nights of the soul and dark nights of the senses. Moments, weeks, months, even years sometimes, where people are not able to access that same feeling that God, you are present. And then on the other side of that, there's still a turn that comes. But the process of going through that is one of hurt and confusion. But there's also hope. Get it? Come on now. We ain't in chapter 15. 22. Tell Siri, 22. We'll keep going. There is a hope. This is not hopeless. It is hard. It is horrific to walk through. It is not hopeless. David goes on, and we don't know how much time between verse 21 and 22. We read it in one stop. I don't know how much time went by. I don't know if he's writing this whole thing on the post end. I don't know if this is like 17 journal entries of his that got smashed together into one song. I can tell you it is probably not sitcom length. He's had this much pain and suffering and loss and loneliness and isolation and hurt and sadness and depression and emotional stress happening. That wasn't just overnight. Then all of a sudden he's like, oh, well, now that I wrote verse 21, verse 22. But for our sake, they put it together so we can see them both. I will declare your name to my people. In the assembly, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him. Revere him, all you descendants of Israel. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but he has listened to his cry for help. David, at some point, has his cry answered, and he is helped. From you comes the theme of my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. At the end of the earth, I will remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive. In case you're wondering, that's the only kind of people there are. None of us can keep ourselves alive. That comes from God. Posterity will serve him. From generations, future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. Despite the anguish of the earlier verses, Psalm 22 shifts these notes of triumph and hope. David praises God's faithfulness and declares his sovereignty over the nations. And this transition from lament to praise mirrors the crucifixion to resurrection. I'm going to have you go back to those groups you were just with. We just read a whole chapter, and I'm guessing as you were reading it, you had some things in your mind that hyperlinked in a way to things about Jesus. If it was just the cry on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus quoted that. There's actually a few other things in this passage that point forward in his case, we look at it back, but point forward to Jesus on the cross, that they would say this isn't just a personal psalm for David, but it's a prophetic one. It's telling not just of David's experience, but of Jesus's. I'm going to have you go back to each other for just a few minutes. Was there anything that was described, and if it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, bro, just stare somebody else down. They'll start talking. What is it that maybe from this chapter reminds you of something in Jesus on the cross as you've been reading that in Matthew? It could be a direct quote. It could be an imagery. It could be a scene. Turn towards each other, and would you just give a few of those? Because the road to redemption led through David, but it ended in Jesus. And so let's take a moment and look at what we can see this story compared with Jesus's. Ready? Set? Go. I'm going to pass my mic around for this one. So if you have something you saw or even a few things you saw, it would be great if you spoke that out loud. You don't have to. We're not going to cancel you if you don't. But I would love it if it was one of those things that we could do to encourage each other. But what from this psalm hyperlinked to something or that you see in Jesus on the cross as well? And if there's a few, you're welcome to say a few. Throw your hand up and I'll get you my mic.
In verses 16 through 18, dogs surround me and a pack of villains encircles me. And then just to go down to 18, they divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments.
It's literally a snapshot from the cross, right? They took Jesus' clothes off and they're at the bottom of the cross. And there's the story that's told where they're casting lots to figure out who gets his garment. Because they're going to rip it up and they're like, nah, we can't do that. Like, that's when we just get a piece. So let's just roll dice for it and see who gets the whole thing. And so they steal Jesus' clothes in that moment, surrounded by this pack of people who just wanted to destroy him. Yeah, that's a verse that's quoted in another telling, absolutely. What else? Yep.
Verses 7 and 8. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him.
Where do you say Jesus?
He was mocked and, scorned. And then when he was on the cross, it was, if you're the Son of God, have God come down and save you.
Yeah. Who else?
Verse 14, when it says, I'm poured out like water and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted within me. Our group had said Jesus' side when they put the sphere in and water came out.
Yeah, the way even Jesus was crucified, right? You're hung on a cross and all your bones go out of joint because of the weight of your body hanging on that. And so even looking at that way that he dies, there's in that moment even that description. His bones, he said, my bones are on display. Taking the lashes that he would expose literally through his flesh, his skeleton, as they ripped it away, stroke after whip after stroke. Like that imagery. He was parched. Do you remember? He said, I thirst, right? That description that they give, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. It's like a piece of pottery in there. It's completely dry. We see all this imagery pointing forward prophetically to what Jesus would experience on the cross. Does anybody else have one more that they want to say? I don't want to cut you off, but we will carry on without you. Great. What I want us to see from this even brief snapshot back is that David's lament, turning to praise in Psalm 22, it helps us to see a portrait of Jesus in a very poetic way. The pain that he suffered on the cross, screaming out, my God, why have you forsaken me? When he called that out, it's like if we were to recite the first line of a really popular song. I don't know, what's a song that everybody would know? Help me out, I'm blanking on songs. You guys. Living on a Prayer. So if that tune starts, right? If that tune starts, all of you start tapping your feet or thinking through. There is Bon Jovi playing in your background. And so when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Every single Jewish person that's standing around goes immediately to this song and this psalm. In their minds, it's raised to, this is what David experienced. And I can't help but imagine that in their mind, they're also seeing, this is what's unfolding before us. They weren't random words that Jesus chose, but they help us see that he was taking up his role in prophetically answering what this psalm pointed forward to. He walked the path of pain and suffering, but in doing so offers us a way forward. So we don't just look back and see, well, David suffered, but he made it through it. We have a true and greater David, Jesus, who suffered not just randomly, but for us, right? On the cross, as we read through Matthew, we recognize that Jesus is taking on himself the pain, the suffering, the loss, the curse that creation is under. And the cost of that is death. And there was not a darker day than the day Jesus died. We engage with some very dark moments. There is not a darker day when the Creator was crucified. The divine Son of God was dead. But what we see in that moment, one author says, like a river that rushes under a frozen surface, is that God was absolutely still at work in what seemed like stillness and absence. That under this seemingly day of silence and sadness, that Saturday where nothing happened, Jesus just died, that God was still absolutely on the move. And we look and we see not only the death of Jesus, but the resurrection. Through Jesus, we find ultimate hope. We can look back not just at David and see how he made it through, but we look at Jesus and recognize he made it through, and then in his resurrection brings the brightest of days in bringing new creation to now. So we see the darkest of dark, but the most brilliant of days. And in that, we find hope. In that, we see that even when God doesn't seem like he's moving, he seems distant. I'm crying out, you're not answering right away. Isn't this the way it's supposed to work? I cry, you answer. When that's not happening, we look back, and that's the cross and the resurrection, the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus give us an anchor point for our hope. It's that we have our hope rooted in these events of the gospel. And then what I love about this is we look back, right? We look back to that in the same way David looked back, and he's like, you did it for Israel. You did it for all these people. Now will you do it for me? We stand a little bit further in the story of God, and we look back not just on David, not just on Israel, but we look back on Jesus. And we say, no, what God did in Jesus, he will one day do for the world. And even in the moments where circumstances seem too dark, that there's no way that can happen. We're meant to remember, yeah, people thought that before. And God still absolutely is at work. And just like David looked forward, there will be a day when these things happen, and that's fulfilled in Jesus. We actually look forward to a day when the resound will be the same thing that's said at the end of this psalm. He has done it. There is a final act of the story, one yet coming, when God will finally and fully restore all things. So our hope is not just rooted in the past, though it is, but it points forward to the future, that there's still something yet to be done. A moment where there is no more fog, when there is no more violence, when there is there's no more darkness, there's no more despair, there's no more crying. The tears are wiped away, that God restores everything, that the sad things are swallowed up in this victory of Jesus. And that's the great hope of the follower of Jesus. Not that everything always works out right now the way we want it, but that God is absolutely present with us in this mess, and one day he will make it right. And so when we find ourselves in the mix of that mess, would we, like David, would we, like Jesus, we would, like sisters and brothers who surround the world, who face circumstances, still cry out, still praise, still press on. In the 19th century, successful lawyer and businessman in Chicago experienced a series of devastating losses. His son died of scarlet fever. That was still a thing back then. In the wake of that loss, there's the great fires in Chicago, which swept through the city and knocked out almost all his real estate investments. So in a matter of just a few months, he faced the death of his child, and then he faced a loss of all his assets, because they didn't have quite the same insurance structure we had, where you just get paid until they rebuild it. Assets gone, part of his family gone. His family reeling in the wake of all of that, he decides to send his wife and his 4 daughters to head across to go visit England, to go spend some time in Europe and be able to recenter themselves there. As they head over there, their ship collides with another ship and rapidly sinks. He gets a telegram from the wife, saved alone. All 4 of his daughters passed away. And as you can imagine, a great darkness ensues, right? Devastating loss. This isn't flannel graph stories. This is a guy who just lost his 5 kids and his wife barely survived, and he gets a 2-word telegram unfolding this story. Financial assets in ruin. And so he takes a ship and he's on his way over to join his wife to grieve the loss. And as he's on the way over there, the songwriter Horatio Spafford pens the words to "It Is Well With My Soul." They say as he's going across the water, very likely in the same spots that his daughters had been submerged, he writes the words that we sing sometimes that give us anchors for our soul. If you haven't heard the song, you can look at it later. I'm not singing it for us. But the lyrics look like this in some places, just to show how he does the same thing that David did, that we're called into. By anchoring it in the events of the gospel, he's able to find a way forward, not bypassing the pain, not dismissing it, not admitting that it hurts, but finding a way to press on. He writes, though Satan should buffet, though trial should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless estate, and he shed his own blood for my soul. He looks back at the events of the gospel, and he says, even in the face of devastating loss and darkness and confusion, I can look at these events and know that God is still present even when I don't feel him. Those words have echoed out since the 19th century as words which followers of Jesus sing to reorient themselves to remember this to be true. For us today, here's where I'm going to land. My prayer is that Psalm 22 invites us into a journey through the depths of despair, but also to the heights of hope. It teaches us that even in our darkest moments, God is present and his love will never fail. We don't just look at the words of the psalm, but we look at the story of Jesus to see that even in the dark spaces and places, God's love and redemption endures. That God sees you in your suffering and he even enters into it. But his love never fails. That there is always a death before there's a resurrection. There is a cross before there is a crown. And as we follow Jesus, we will find moments where the darkness is crashing in and we are crying out. My encouragement is that you flip open the words of this psalm and let them become yours. If you can't make it to verse 22, keep reading 1 through 21 then. And my prayer is that we, like David, like the people of God for centuries, would find great hope in God's faithful, ongoing, merciful love and his presence, which is guaranteed. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you for the hope that we have in Jesus, who understands our pain and our suffering. God, if we're in places of darkness and even pockets of our hearts where it feels like you're not present, I ask that even this morning you would make your presence known. God, that's a work that only you can do. Would you help my sisters and my brothers who feel like they're in those spaces, not to feel like something's wrong with them, but to recognize that you're at work even in that moment. That you're not disappointed with us when we're in despair, but your presence pursues us even there. God, would Jesus be more precious to us as we recognize he knows what that feels like. And after a season, resurrection came. Would we believe in resurrection as well? That death is not our final destiny, but there is new life. And we ask this in your name, Jesus, and by the power of your Spirit. Amen. So I'm realizing we started off with a comfort food meal and we're moving towards the table. This is not a Jesus juke, but I do want us to consider this. In the same way, our hearts and our souls and our minds often go to those cheesy, fatty foods that give us comfort or the sugary rushes. We all know what the end result of that is, right? We feel good and then we feel like crap. We feel worse is what I was going to go with, but they're both there. They don't sustain you. They don't nourish you. It's a quick hit. It's a quick fix, but it doesn't endure. I love that when Jesus wants to remind us of his presence, he gives us a meal as well. But the meal that he gives us reminds us of a hope that does endure, that does bring life. And so when we come to the table, we see it not just a place of suffering, though it is his blood and his body that we represent, but we see life, full and flourishing, made possible by his death. He died so we could live. We see not only hurt, but healing. We see not only confusion, but community forming. In this meal, I really pray that today again, we find Jesus extending hope and nourishment for the journey that he knows at times will be very, very difficult. And so in a moment, Sarah will have the bread on this side. There's a regular bread, then there's gluten-free as well. If that's what you need, feel free to take either one. I'll have the juice over here, and we invite you, if you're a follower of Jesus, you're welcome to rise, come, and grab the elements, and then return to your seat, and we'll take them together as one family. But Missio, you're welcome to the table.